Congressman Phil Roe is the chair of the House Veterans Affairs Committee and a medical doctor from Tennessee. So, of course, the obvious place to start is as a physician. You've had a chance over many years to look at VA medical care. What's been your assessment?
Well, you know, I actually started out as a medical student in Memphis, Tennessee, as a student rotating through the VA, and then later as an intern rotating through the VA, and then later in my private practice seeing VA patients as a consultant. So I've really walked through the whole gamut from just learning how to, at the very beginnings of my education, all the way through to being the consultant for the VA. And I grew up in a military town, Clarksville, Tennessee, which is the home of the 101st Airborne Division.
Certainly.
So all of my friends of dads, for the most part, were in the military.
So from that very inside perspective there, and to now looking at it from the perspective of congressional oversight, what changes have you seen for good and ill? You
know, I think that our VA, I'll speak at home, we have a large VA campus, over 100-acre campus right in the center of Johnson City, Tennessee, where I live, Mountain Home VA. It's a 4-star, I expect it to be a 5-star VA very soon, but it's the quality of care I have seen improve dramatically over the last 30 years. Since I've been in that community. And I think the people, I talked to some folks yesterday in Sevierville, Tennessee. We were dedicating a CBOC to a fallen soldier who died in 1969 in Vietnam, Danny Carr. And anyway, I can't tell you how many veterans came up and said, "Doc, my care is first rate at the VA."
So one gets a sense, because you hear these stories about facilities that don't reach that standard of excellence, that there are high points and low points across the system. Is there a lack of consistency?
I think that's it. The old saying is, if you've visited one VA, you visited one VA. But that can be said for hospitals in the private sector too. The quality varies, and it varies on where you are. For instance, the challenges in rural America. I happen to live in rural America, but I happen to live in an area that's a big medical area. As a matter of fact, the town I live in, 1% of the population of over 60,000 people are doctors. So we have a huge number of doctors. We're very blessed there, but I had the privilege of traveling all over the country, visiting VAs, and I was in Pasco, Washington, in the Yakima Valley last October, and they have a completely different set of issues. If you're in Wyoming or Montana or one of the South and North Dakota, very rural areas, Nebraska, it's a different situation for them. So yes, it does vary. Urban areas have a tendency to be able to attract faculty easier, doctors, providers easier, as opposed to rural areas, which have a much tougher time.
Do you see any solutions on the horizon for that, to sort of spread that quality?
No, I absolutely do. And one of the things that I think Dr. Schulk and I know our committee wants to do, not just me, but our committee wants to do, is to leverage the best of both the private sector and the VA sector for veterans care. And I'll give you an example. At home, they've lost some cardiologists, but a local cardiology group of 40 doctors stepped up with cardiac surgeons, peripheral vascular surgeons, interventional cardiologists, physiologists, the whole package, and said, we'll put a couple of our people on campus full-time, so you'll have access to the expertise of this entire group. So you've married the best of the private sector with the VA. And that's what I think we have to do, because there's a doctor shortage literally in the private sector also. So I think both the private sector and the VA have to work together.
Interesting, and that's something in the middle of the point of view that, well, let's privatize everything, or let's make everything inside a VA facility.
Absolutely. I think you've got to use the best of both worlds, and I think we're going to do that. I think the doctors want to. When I saw VA patients, I saw them exactly like I would someone in my office who was my private patients, and many of them decided they wanted to come see me outside the VA. And that should be the veteran's choice, and I think that's one of the things we're working on with Choice 2.0. And we passed the Choice Act, which extended it to the end of this year, but we've only got about 8 months to really put a Choice 2.0 program which works like that. And I think Dr. Shulkin, that's a vision that he has, a VA secretary.
Beyond sort of that civilian physicians or outside physicians working inside the hospital, what else might you see as a big part of a very good 2.0 of that?
Well, I think the key thing is to put the veteran in charge of these decisions. If a veteran is getting the kind of care they want, they're going to seek out, just like you and I. I mean, I'm no different. I'm a veteran, and I want the best care I can get. Sometimes it's inside the VA, sometimes it's outside the VA. And I think if it's outside the VA, we let the veteran make that choice. And I think that's how you make the VA better. In other words, every day I got up, I had to compete. Let's say your wife came to see me as a patient, And I'd been seeing her for 25 years, and if she decided I wasn't doing the right care, she could vote with her feet. Many of our veterans, because of their economic status or other things, cannot. And I think the VA does some things very, very well. I think they do PTSD treatment well. When you can get in that, they're certainly getting better. Is it perfect? No, but it never will be. But they're working to improve that. I think injuries limb amputations and so forth that they've done, they do an incredibly good job with that. And I talked to our VA director yesterday at home, and he's beginning to work on the medical home concept, which is really a totality of care where the patient and the doctor work together as a team.
Interesting. So you talk about things that they do well. A traumatic brain injury, the research facility in Tampa seems to be one. Are there some others that you've noted around the VA system?
I think if you look at both DOD and VA, how they treated limb injuries, I've been to Walter Reed many times, and we had over 1,600 losses of limbs in Afghanistan and Iraq. And you can take that information. I know when we were in the military, how you treat shock. Vietnam, we did it one way. I was in Iraq, I've been in Afghanistan on 3 occasions and been to their forward surgical hospitals and see how they treat it. It's completely different and has improved dramatically, and a lot of people are alive today because of what was learned. Those skills that we learned are transferable to the VA. Limb injuries, for instance, how you take care of those.
Right. The other side of that coin, as you look at the VA, the state of the VA right now, where are the areas where the improvement is most needed?
I think there are several things. One is in claims. When you have a veteran that comes in and has a disability claim, we have 480,000 veterans on appeals right now. And tomorrow we're going to mark up a bill that will help expedite that appeals process. And that has to be done, and I think we're going to get overwhelming bipartisan support for that. Number 2 is accountability. Right now, the directors, the secretary and the directors of these VA don't have the needed power to get rid of bad employees. Look, many of the veterans employees at home are friends of mine. I practice medicine with a lot of my doctor. One of my doctors I went to medical school with is now at the VA. I can't see him. I'm mad at him because he left private practice and went to the VA. He's a great doc, and the veterans are getting some really good care that way. But I think when you have a bad employee, you should have a way to terminate that person without it going on months and months and sometimes even years. We passed an accountability bill over to the Senate, which they've agreed on. We've agreed to their language, and I think that's going to go to the president very soon.
Mm-hmm. Is the VA situation with regard to accountability different from other government agencies in some way? Obviously, there's the medical care aspect, which in some ways unique.
Yeah, I think it is. I think the difference is, look, if you're pushing papers somewhere, it's one thing. When you have a patient's life in your hands, and that may even be part of the bureaucracy, when you're holding up a needed piece of equipment or contracting or all those things that you do that directly affect whether I, as a physician at the bedside, have the tools I need to take care of a patient. Absolutely. Patient care is different than other parts of government. I've always thought that as a practitioner. It's different than someone who works in retail or in the restaurant business. What I have is I have life and death decisions that I have to make every day.
When you talk about the claims that are being made, often that involves trying to get access. A person says, I have a particular problem. I'm hoping the VA will help me with that. And so this idea of access, what's your sense of how long people are having to wait, say Iraq and Afghanistan veterans coming back now, and how long it should take to get to a point of a decision and then care?
Well, that's a complex question right there. First of all, one of the problems that the VA had, as you know, in Phoenix and other areas, not just Phoenix, but other areas, was availability of getting in. Can I get in even if I'm qualified? I'm on a list, it takes me forever to get in. That's being improved. I can tell you Dr. Shulkin and Bob McDonald also worked very hard on trying to shorten those wait times. And some of those, for instance, routine physicals, if you and I are feeling pretty good, it doesn't matter whether I get the physical next week or in 3 weeks, it really doesn't. But if you have an urgent need, you should be seen immediately. And the VA I really believe this, they're trying their best to improve that, because if you can't get in, it doesn't matter what the quality is if you can't get in the door. So that's number one. And number two, we have to figure out, and we're going to figure out, how to shorten the length of time, once that person's come in, been evaluated, to get an evaluation that's accurate for that veteran. And one of it, and the veteran service officers, I want to give a shout out to them. I've met many of them around the country. They're a great resource to be able to put a good claim together, a completed claim, fully developed claim they're called, so that someone, an adjudicator who's actually looking at it, can make a decision quickly.
So this is taking advantage of the American Legion, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and other private groups that then liaise with the VA.
Correct.
Right. With regard to accessibility, what do you think the key challenges Secretary Shulkin will face as he tries to reduce those wait times?
Well, I think part of it is getting staffed up. I was talking to the director yesterday in my local VA, and he had added, just in the first, I guess he's been there less than 120 days, almost 100 employees. So he was short. He's getting staffed up properly, and the hiring freeze has not affected health care. That clearly was off limits when the President Trump was, and I want to give a shout out to the President. I watched his acceptance speech the night he was elected. One of the first things he said, and being on the Veterans Affairs Committee, knowing I was going to chair it, it really meant a lot to me to say, in the first 2 or 3 minutes, he mentioned veterans. I really appreciated that, because I'm a Vietnam era veteran, and we didn't get mentioned too much at the end of Vietnam. And it was great to hear a president say, that's really important to me, and I really believe it is.
One of the things we're doing with the CBS Radio Veterans Network, which we'll be launching shortly, is trying to break down, well, we talk to a lot of veterans who tell us, you know, there was this great program that was available, and I never learned about it until a fellow veteran told me, in just some sort of random environment. And it seems that there are programs out there that people are having difficulty connecting to, either through the difficulty, say, of a web page that's difficult to navigate, or information being in a variety of places, or perhaps not being sure about the credibility of whoever might be providing that information. We're trying to sort of aggregate and make that easier. Is something like that helpful, you think, in as you talk to veterans, for something they might need? Oh,
no doubt about it. And one of the things you mentioned, me being a Vietnam era veteran, sort of tells people how old I am. Well, the younger veterans are very techno-savvy. I mean, they grew up with video games and all this, so they are able to access things much easier, I think, because of just their technological advantage. But the websites have been cleaned up. The one at the VA is much better than it was. I've been on it and tried to navigate it, and it's much easier now. That information's out there. You can use veteran service officers, and most every county has one. The American Legion Veterans of the Vietnam Veterans of America, they have one. They have at almost anywhere you have that available now. So getting that information is much easier than it used to be.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm interested in just the sense of being a veteran now compared to, I served in 76 to 96. You were a little bit before that. What do you think is the biggest difference in what veterans face and the veterans themselves now compared to then?
Well, I sort of laugh about when I separated from the military. Yours may have been a little different, but I went in and had about a 24-hour time to make my mind up I was going to leave. And basically they have a thing now called the transition program. Well, it wasn't any transition, but you just sort of out the door you went. So you really didn't know a lot about what was going on. When you left, what was available to you. I did know this, and I appreciated this, and I appreciate it to this day, and you probably used it too, was a GI Bill. My GI Bill paid $300 a month, and I got to use it for 2 years, not a full 3 years, but 2 years, and I'm appreciative to this day for that, my country providing that for me.
Yeah, I'm seeing now with young veterans, with this new improved GI Bill that they have available, I'm seeing veterans going to schools that I couldn't have afforded to go to. They qualified for them academically, but the GI Bill now will allow them these quality educations.
It's amazing. That post 9/11 GI Bill is an incredible benefit. It pays any in-state tuition, so any state that takes a person on GI Bill has to accept that as in-state, which they should. I mean, that's not a big deal. And I think most people are happy to do that, and it pays a per diem and then some money for books, so it's an incredible benefit.
Great. Anything I've not asked that in the course of your work as chairman particularly you think is important for veterans?
You know, I do. I think, first of all, not for the first time, but I believe our country really has stepped up. I know I get on a lot of airplanes, 2 flights a day to get here, and it makes me feel good. I mean, I'm just a guy sitting over on a bench watching people get on an airplane. And when they announce if you're an active duty military, you can board first. That makes me feel good. As an old veteran, I feel good about that. The country stepped up and said your service is worth something. I remember getting off an airplane here about a year ago in D.C., and they asked us all to stay on the airplane because the remains of a Vietnam veteran was going to be taken to Arlington and buried, and everyone sat there, no one moved. And that's changed, I think, and that's a good thing. And I do want to tell our veterans out there that, you know, when I got here in 2009, we spent $97 billion on veterans' health care claims and cemeteries. Today, that number is $180 billion. So just in 8 short years, that number is almost doubled. And so I think that tells you about the commitment both Republicans and Democrats have made to our veterans.
To that issue, and I've talked with the chair and the ranking member on the Senate side, is this an arena in which partisanship is less pronounced than it is in many other aspects of lawmaking these days?
Oh, there's no question that it is. Most of the time, we'll leave that right at the door and walk in and sit down and say, what's best for veterans? And occasionally it will. If it's a union bill or something like that, that will come up. But for the most part, when you walk in here, you're going to see people on both sides of the aisle trying to figure out what's the best thing we can do to improve care for veterans.
Great. Appreciate your
time.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.